I have recently written an article for New Eastern Outlook. It is titled US-Ukrainian ATACMS strikes on Crimea, Vindicate Moscow. This is about an ATACMS strike on Crimea. A missile with cluster munitions targeted a populated beach, killed civilians, including children, injured many more. And the Russian Federation is blaming not just Ukraine, but also the United States for this. So let me read this article, and I have additional information that I want to share with you. I also want to show you the sources that I'm citing in this article. In the last week of June 2024, Ukraine carried out what appeared to be another unsuccessful ATACMS strike on Crimea. Of the several missiles launched, all but one were intercepted. The last missile was initially reported to have been deflected, where it detonated over a beach, killing several civilians, including children, and injuring many more. What could have been concluded as a tragic accident ended up incriminating Kiev, not because of anything Moscow said in response, but because of what a senior advisor to Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky said regarding the missile strike. And this senior advisor is Podolyak. He's a senior advisor to the current Ukrainian president, Volodymyr Zelensky. But first, let's take a look at this article here. I cite, Crimean sunbathers struck by deadly shrapnel shower from Ukrainian missile. Russian officials say at least 5 killed after air systems intercepted projectile over busy holiday resort. It was a holiday that during which this ATACMS strike was conducted. The article says shrapnel from an intercepted US-made missile fired by Ukraine hit a beach packed with sunbathing tourists in occupied Crimea. Russian officials said at least 5 people, including 3 children, had died of shrapnel wounds, and they expected the death toll to rise. However, also the Telegraph, in a regular audio report, a podcast, if you will, titled Ukraine, the Latest, they would cite Podolyak as saying,
Mykhailo Podolyak, one of Zelensky's advisors, the chap that Francis interviewed when we were last in Ukraine, in a very punchy statement, he said, quote, there are not and cannot be any beaches, tourist zones and other fictitious signs of peaceful life in Crimea. Crimea is definitely a foreign territory occupied by Russia, where there are hostilities and a full-scale war, the very war that Russia unleashed for genocidal and invasive purposes only. Crimea is also a large military camp and warehouse with hundreds of direct military targets, which the Russians are cynically trying to hide and cover up with their own civilians, which in turn are considered to be civilian occupiers, end of quote. Now, it doesn't leave much room for interpretation there, certainly not a kind of comment, David, that you might think, looking into it, regret all civilian loss of life, etc., etc. So a very hard position there taken by one of President Zelensky's principal advisors. I do ask, can a baby ever be a civilian occupier?
The people Podolyak is referring to are people who have been living in Crimea since before 2014, when a referendum was held to rejoin Russia, the rest of Russia. Crimea has always historically been part of Russia. And as hard as this quote is to believe, pro-Ukrainian media has confirmed it. This is a whole article presenting this quote by Podolyak. And this quote is so monstrous that even the commentators doing the Telegraph podcast, who are fanatically pro-Ukrainian, pro-NATO, pro-American, pro-British, they couldn't bring themselves to defend what Podolyak said. Let me continue. Podolyak's words suggest that what at first appeared to be an accidental death of civilians was instead part of an official Ukrainian government policy of targeting, terrorizing, and eliminating Crimea's population of civilian occupiers. While even the Telegraph's podcast commentators found Podolyak's words shocking and indefensible, to those following the development of Ukraine's crisis from 2014 onward, this comes as no surprise, and in fact serves only as the latest evidence of both Washington and Kiev's attitude toward Russian-speaking Ukrainians, as well as Russia itself, and the fundamental threat the US and its client regime in Kiev posed to not only the rest of Ukraine from 2014 onward, but also to neighboring Russia. Podolyak is saying it out loud, exactly what the problem is. Now, in this article, I get into the demographic realities on Crimea and this schizophrenic perspective, Kiev holds that Crimea is Ukrainian territory occupied by Russia that they need to liberate, but also that Crimea its population is infested with civilian occupiers. People have always lived there. They're somehow civilian occupiers. Why is that? Because the population of Crimea has always been pro-Russian, overwhelmingly identifying as Russian, pro-Russian, seeking to pivot closer to Russia than the West. And how do we know this? Because US government funded polling back in 2013, a year before the US overthrew the elected government of Ukraine, confirmed this. And so let's go through all of that. A year before the US government openly overthrew the elected government of Ukraine, its agencies, including USAID and the International Republican Institute, IRI, conducted polling across all of Ukraine, including the Autonomous Republic of Crimea. So there were two polls, one specifically for the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and one for the rest of Ukraine. So this is it. Public opinion survey, residents of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, May 16 and 30th, 2013. And there you can see the US government funding, and they go through a wide variety of questions, and it is very, very interesting. So let's read through it. 40% of Crimeans saw themselves, regardless of their passport, as Russian, with 24% seeing themselves as Crimean, and a mere 15% considering themselves Ukrainian. So the largest demographic group are people who identify as being Russian and then Crimean. People who identify as Ukrainian are a small minority. And so this is what Podolyak means. He doesn't have a problem with Crimea just because Russia is there now from 2014 onward. People like him have had a problem with Crimea and Eastern Ukraine all along. They hate Russia. They hate Russian-speaking Ukrainians, and they want them gone. And that is what has motivated them to carry out this campaign of violence from 2014 onward, which precipitated the Crimean parliament to request Russian troops for protection, to hold a referendum and join the Russian Federation, and what compelled people in the Donbas region to take up arms and fight against Kiev. Let's go on to the next one. The same document revealed that if given a choice to enter only one international economic union, 53% right here would choose the customs union with Russia, Belarus, and Kazakhstan, while only 17% would choose the European Union. When you look at this graph, you can just see the disparity here, and you can see the pro-Russian sentiment. This wasn't something invented by Moscow. This is something US government funded polling confirmed itself a year before the US overthrew the elected government of Ukraine. When asked about their attitude toward various entities, 68%, this is for Russia, 68% felt warm toward Russia, with only 5% feeling cold. Compare that to the European Union. 14% feel warm, 15% cold, 70% neutral. What about the United States? The most unpopular of them all, 6% feel warm, 68% feel neutral, 24% cold. And this was before the United States overthrew the elected government and installed vehemently anti-Russian proxies in power who would then persecute Russian-speaking Ukrainians and carry out violence against them. That was before any of this actually happened. When asked about the status of Crimea, this is a very interesting one. Let's look at the graph. 53% of respondents wanted to maintain Crimea as an autonomous republic, autonomy in Ukraine, status quo. Only 2% wanted to become a common oblast of Ukraine. And a surprising 23%, more than a fifth of respondents, wanted Crimea to be given to Russia. It was clear even before the political crisis Washington precipitated less than a year later in Kiev, part of a years-long campaign of regime change in Ukraine, that public sentiment across Crimea was pro-Russian. Because of the overt anti-Russian sentiment of Washington's client regime in Kiev, Crimeans would predictably turn to Russia, both for protection and for securing their future. So all of this talk about Russia invading Crimea, holding a referendum at gunpoint, forcing people to choose Russia, to choose to join Russia, is nonsense. US government-funded polling confirms that even before the political crisis, people viewed Russia warmly. They identified as Russian, and even a large number of them, considering the relative calm before the storm, a fifth already wanted to join Russia anyway. So let's talk about what happened in 2014. And again, this is all to explain why Podolyak is talking about exterminating the civilian population of Crimea. This is what I'm trying to explain here, that this wasn't just some example of Podolyak's poor judgment. This is the mindset in Kiev. This is what the US deliberately installed into power back in 2014. The BBC, this article right here, Russian parliament approves troop deployment in Ukraine. The article not only admits Crimea had its own local government, again, because it was an autonomous republic within Ukraine, but that the local government made a request to Moscow specifically for protection. So this wasn't a unilateral decision made by Russia. The independent parliament in Crimea requested Russian protection. It says the newly elected pro-Moscow leader of Crimea earlier said he had appealed to Mr. Putin for help to ensure peace on the peninsula, a request which the Kremlin said it would not leave unnoticed. And what the BBC is saying, or trying to do by wording it this way, pro-Moscow leader of Crimea, as you can tell by the US government polling, everyone was pro-Moscow. Why wouldn't the leader of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea also be pro-Moscow? They leave that out. It is a lie of omission. The entire article and everything the BBC and the Western media has done all throughout 2014 and after has been deliberately leaving out context so people draw the wrong conclusions. That is extremely deliberate. The article also indirectly refers to the special status of Crimea, admitting that Russia's Black Sea Fleet had maintained a permanent presence in Crimea at Sevastopol before political chaos and violence spread across Ukraine that year. So there were already Russian troops in Crimea. They were at Sevastopol. They've always been at Sevastopol. Russia's deployment of troops to protect Crimea and oversee a successful referendum, overwhelmingly reflecting Crimea's desire to join the Russian Federation, was the logical outcome considering the anti-Russian nature of Washington's client regime installed into power in Kiev, and the pro-Russian nature of Crimea's population, according to even US government-funded polling conducted the year before. The most recent ATACMS strikes on Crimea and Kiev's unrepentant comments regarding civilian deaths, referring to Crimeans as civilian occupiers and declaring there cannot be any beaches, tourist zones, and other fictitious signs of peaceful life in Crimea, reflects an enduring mindset that fully vindicates Moscow's decision to deploy troops to Crimea in 2014 and the aspirations of the Crimean people to join the Russian Federation thereafter. Podolyak's comments, again, it is not an anomaly. It is the deeply seated mindset in Kiev. These are the people the US deliberately sought to put into power to transform Ukraine into a battering ram against Russia. This unrepentant brutality is exactly why Crimeans turned to Russia for protection, and Russia answered their calls. This ATACMS strike is just the latest in a long line of crimes and acts of brutality carried out by US-backed governments in Kiev from 2014 onward. This is only the latest in a long line. This is exactly why there is a war right now. Kiev's current public stance regarding Crimea and its civilian population, again, as civilian occupiers, reveals that the peninsula is not regarded as occupied territory Kiev seeks to liberate, but Russian territory with Russian people to be seized and ethnically cleansed. And that's how they saw Crimea even before the referendum, and that is how they saw the Donbas region, which was why they fought an 8-year war leading to Russia's intervention in 2022 in the first place. It was this mentality that spurred civil war across Ukraine from 2014 onward, and it was this mentality in Kiev, fully enabled, armed, and backed by the collective West, which prompted Russia's military intervention in Ukraine from 2022 onward. As the West routinely does, it now depicts Russia's reaction to a clear and present danger of NATO-enabled aggression on its borders, aimed at its people, as aggression, and the collective West's continued efforts to perpetuate this threat to Russia and its people as defensive in nature. But by looking at the collective West's own reporting since 2014, as well as US government's own polling data, we can see just how backwards this narrative is. Only time will tell how long it takes people across the Western world still supporting Washington's proxy war in Ukraine to see this as well. So this explains why Ukraine is targeting beaches. I was honestly willing to write it off as a tragic accident until Podolyak incriminated the Ukrainian government and armed forces deliberately attacking civilians. He calls civilian occupiers. At beaches, he claims, should be cleared of any sign of peace and a normal life. But why is Russia blaming the United States for this attack specifically? I didn't really get into that in this article, but I was giving it some thought, and I recalled some older articles that I almost surely have covered in previous updates. Let's start with, say, this one right here. The Washington Post, February 2023. Ukraine's rocket campaign reliant on U.S. precision targeting, officials say. Ukrainian officials say they almost never launch HIMARS rounds without detailed coordinates provided by the U.S. military personnel situated elsewhere in Europe. And what the Washington Post is admitting is that HIMARS, which fires shorter range guided rockets, but also ATACMS, they don't fire them unless they get detailed targeting information from the US. So if they're deliberately hitting beaches in Crimea to clear out civilian occupiers, it was done using targeting data provided by the United States. The whole reason the Washington Post wrote this article was to impress upon the public that Ukraine could be trusted with these long-range weapons, that they would not abuse them, they would not use them for carrying out atrocities, crimes against humanity. And the reason people worried about trusting Ukraine is because from 2014 to 2022, that is what they had been doing in the Donbas region all along. So let's go through this Washington Post article. Ukrainian officials said they required coordinates provided or confirmed by the United States and its allies for the vast majority of strikes using its advanced US-provided rocket systems. A previously undisclosed practice that reveals a deeper and more operationally active role for the Pentagon in the war. It is a U.S. proxy war. It would not be fought unless the U.S. wanted it to be fought. It is perpetuated because the U.S. wants it to be perpetuated. This is not a war between Ukraine and Russia. It is a war between the U.S. and Russia being fought in Ukraine, using Ukrainians as an intermediary, as proxies. Hence why it is a proxy war. The disclosure, confirmed by 3 senior Ukrainian officials and a senior U.S. official, comes after months of Kiev's forces pounding Russian targets, including headquarters, ammunition depots, and barracks, on Ukrainian soil with the U.S.-provided high-mobility artillery rocket system, or HIMARS, and other similar precision-guided weapons, such as the M270 multiple-launch rocket system. The HIMARS has 1 launch pod with 6 rockets or 1 ATACMS. The M270 has 2 pods, 12 guided rockets, or 2 ATACMS missiles. One senior Ukrainian official said Ukrainian forces almost never launch the advanced weapons without specific coordinates provided by U.S. military personnel from a base elsewhere in Europe. Ukrainian officials say this process should give Washington confidence about providing Kiev with longer range weapons. And of course, the longer range weapon at that time in February 2023 that they were referring to were ATACMS, these 300-kilometer range ballistic missiles. And then it says the senior Ukrainian official contended that the Ukrainian military would face the same limitations it does now with conventional HIMARS rounds if it received ATACMS, with Ukraine still dependent on U.S. targeting coordinates. This is a quote. You're controlling every shot anyway, so when you say we're afraid that you're going to use it for some other purposes, well, we can't do it even if we wanted to, the senior Ukrainian official said. So what Ukraine is saying, and what the Washington Post reported, put into print, is that if Ukraine wanted to attack a crowded beach and the US said no, they couldn't launch that strike. And if they did launch the strike, it was because the US gave them the targeting data to do so. The Washington Post continues, a senior U.S. official who, like others, spoke on a condition of anonymity because of the sensitivity of the issue, acknowledged the key American role in the campaign and said the targeting assistance served to ensure accuracy and conserve limited stores of ammunition for maximum effectiveness. And it also says Ukrainian military personnel identified targets they want to hit and in which location, and that information is sent to senior commanders who then relay the request to U.S. partners for more accurate coordinates. The Americans do not always provide the requested coordinates, the official said, in which case the Ukrainian troops do not fire. Not once in this article do they ever say that they'll fire anyway. Ukraine could carry out strikes without U.S. help, but because Kiev doesn't want to waste valuable ammunition and miss, it usually chooses not to strike without U.S. confirmation, the official said, adding that there are no complaints about the process. They're really trying to impress upon you the idea that the U.S. has final say with all of this targeting. And this was to assure people that Ukraine would not abuse longer range weapons. And this is why Russia is blaming the United States, because the Washington Post itself is telling everyone, including people in Russia who can read the Washington Post just like you and I can, they're telling you that the US is giving them the targeting information, and then if they don't, they won't fire these long-range weapons. This is why Russia is outraged, especially when, after an attack on a crowded beach, a senior advisor to the Ukrainian president, Podolyak, is saying there cannot be scenes of peaceful beaches, vacationers. These are civilian occupiers, fully incriminating Ukraine, and because of this relationship between Ukraine and the US firing these weapons, implicating the United States as well. According to, so they go into the details even further on how this whole process works. According to our maps and software, a point will have one set of coordinates. But then we give this target to partners for analysis. The coordinates are different. Why? Because the Americans and NATO countries have access to military satellites. We're all basically always online. They immediately get us the coordinates, and then we fire the multiple launch rocket system right away. A third Ukrainian official confirmed that targeting all goes through an American installation on NATO soil and described the process as very fast. The Post is withholding the name of the base at the request of U.S. officials who cited security concerns. So not U.S. officials who deny its existence and its role in facilitating Ukrainian strikes using long-range weapons, but because they don't want that base to be jeopardized as it is fulfilling this role. And we also remember this. From Politico, leaked audio shows Germany discussed possible Taurus missile delivery to Ukraine. And it also says German military officials also discussed possible targets, including the Kerch Bridge, linking Russia and occupied Crimea, according to media reports. Why were they talking about targets? Because just like with HIMARS, guided rockets, and longer-range ATACMS, the Taurus air-launched cruise missile made by Germany, just like the UK Storm Shadow and the French Scalp, they also require targeting data from NATO. They cannot be used effectively without it. So every single strike carried out with these long-range weapons depends entirely on NATO giving Ukraine not just targeting information, but also mission planning, which means telling Ukraine where Russian air defenses are so that these missiles can circumvent them. And Germany was so worried about, just like the US, being directly involved in this. And of course, if they're transferring the data, they are directly involved in this. So what they did to cover up their direct role in all of this was suggest sending all of this data by a guy driving in a car from Poland to Ukraine, so that there was little chance that it could be intercepted. The German officers also revealed in this leaked audio conversation that there are British and American personnel on the ground helping Ukrainians prepare long-range weapons for these strikes. And this is why Russia is blaming the United States, because the German military admits that they would have to be directly involved in helping Ukrainians use these missiles to hit targets. They admit that there's US and British personnel on the ground helping Ukraine do this with other long-range weapon systems. The Washington Post itself admits They're the ones providing targeting data. If they do not provide targeting information, Ukraine cannot carry out the strikes. This is why Russia is blaming the United States. Far from just another failed ATACMS strike and more senseless death and destruction, this ATACMS strike on a beach in Crimea full of civilians, and especially the self-incriminating comments Podolyak made afterwards, this exposes just how dirty this proxy war, Washington's proxy war, is with Russia in Ukraine. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share. Think about subscribing. It's free to do. It helps the channel grow. Check the video description below for other places you can find and follow my work. I especially suggest people follow me on Telegram. I can post absolutely everything there, from short analysis posted directly to Telegram on daily events, entire videos. I post entire videos, backup videos on Telegram for all of my videos that are up on YouTube. I also am able to share links to articles that are not permitted on other social media platforms, including X, by the way. Also in the video description below are all of the links that I referenced in this video. Take a look at the 2013 US government funded polling regarding Crimea. It's very eye-opening. Also in the video description below are ways you can help support my work. I do not monetize my YouTube channel or any of my other social media platforms. If ads pop up, feel free to skip them. They're not helping me out at all. If you do want to help support my work, please do so through Buy Me a Coffee, and also Patreon. And to everyone who has been helping out, whether it's a one-time donation, donations month to month, or even if you have no extra resources and you're just helping share my work with others, that is all greatly appreciated. I could not do this work without that support. So thank you. And as always, thank you for watching.